You are sitting wherever you are right now. The light on the walls, the air in your lungs, the weight of your body in the chair, the small background sounds of the room. The thoughts passing through your head as you hear these words. The experience feels whole, a complete scene, fully present, containing everything that matters. It feels like you. In 1998, a researcher at Cornell stopped a stranger on a university campus and asked for directions. Mid-conversation, two workers carrying a large wooden door walked between them. Behind the door, the researcher was swapped for a different person, different face, different height, different clothing, different voice. The conversation resumed with the new person. Half the strangers did not notice. They continued giving directions to a different human being without registering the substitution. Their eyes received the full visual information. Their conscious experience received a summary edited aggressively enough that a complete human replacement passed without detection. Simons and Levin published the finding. It has been replicated many times since. The experience you just inventoried, the room, the light, the weight of your body, feels complete in the same way those conversations felt complete to the people giving directions. The completeness is constructed. The detail you feel you possess is detail you do not actually have. The gap between what your brain receives and what awareness contains has been measured across decades. The numbers are not close. They are not off by a factor of 10 or 100. When you write the ratio down on paper, the decimal point disappears into a string of zeros before the first significant digit appears. The door swap is the gentlest demonstration of a gap whose actual scale will take the rest of this discussion to establish. What follows is where the rest goes. What your brain is doing with the fraction you never receive. And why the version of yourself, the one hearing these words right now, the one that feels like the whole story, is the smallest, quietest fraction of the version that is actually running. Studying any of this has a structural difficulty that makes the topic unlike any other in science. Consciousness does not report its own limits. If something has been filtered out of your experience before awareness begins, awareness will never notice the absence. You cannot use introspection to locate what was never introspectable. The tool you would reach for looking inside your own mind to see what is there cannot access what it does not contain. Whatever arrives in your awareness has already been selected, compressed, interpreted, and assembled by systems that do not themselves appear in awareness. You experience the output. You do not experience the editing. So the study of unconscious processing cannot proceed by paying closer attention. Attention is already inside awareness, and awareness is already the filtered output. The work has to be done from outside, through experiments that catch the brain performing tasks the subject is not aware of, through patients whose specific injuries reveal processing that continued without their experience, through behavioral measurements that record actions before the actor reports deciding to act. Over decades, these experiments have accumulated. The picture they produce is consistent, and the first thing the picture reveals is how much your brain is doing to your eyes without asking permission. Look around wherever you are. What you perceive feels like a detailed, continuous visual world. Every object has edges, colors, textures. The space feels full. Your peripheral vision seems to contain information, even if you cannot focus on it directly. The entire scene feels present in your mind. Now test it. Without moving your eyes, try to describe the exact color of something at the edge of your peripheral vision. Try to count the objects on a surface you are not looking directly at. Try to recall the pattern on a wall behind you that you glanced at only briefly when you entered the room. The details are not there. They were never there in your experience. Your visual system did not deliver them. What your visual system delivered was the impression of completeness, a model of a full scene, generated from a small number of focal samples, with the peripheral regions filled in by statistical expectation about what is likely to be there. The completeness is constructed. The detail you feel you have is detail you do not actually possess. Door swap from the opening demonstrates this at the most extreme scale, an entire person replaced without detection, but the editing happens constantly at smaller scales. Your brain fills in the blind spot in each eye, the point where the optic nerve exits the retina, producing a gap in the visual field that your conscious experience never contains. Your brain smooths the 3 to 4 saccadic eye movements per second into a continuous scene. Each saccade produces a brief moment of functional blindness as the eye moves, and you never experience the interruption. Your brain constructs color in the periphery from a sparse sampling of color-sensitive receptors concentrated in the center of the retina. The periphery has almost no color resolution, and you never notice. Each of these edits operates below awareness. Each produces a conscious experience that feels more complete than the data supports. And each demonstrates the principle the door swap made visible. Your eyes collect the full data. Your brain hands you a model. The model is good enough that you never ask where the rest went. Now consider your body, because what your brain does with your eyes is trivial compared to what it does with your movement. Reach toward an object near you, a cup, a pen, your phone. The motion looks simple from the outside. From the inside, it feels simple. You decide to reach, and you reach. But between the decision and the arrival of your hand, something has to compute: the angle of your shoulder, the sequence of elbow flexion, the rotation of your wrist, the opening of your fingers to match the object's shape, the deceleration of the motion so your hand arrives without overshooting, the timing of each muscle activation, the cancellation of gravity on the arm at each instant, the correction for small errors as the motion proceeds. None of that calculation was yours. You could not have done it. You do not know the geometry of your own skeleton well enough to perform the computations consciously. You do not have access to the proprioceptive data stream from your muscles in a form that would let you use it deliberately. If someone asked you to describe the angles involved in reaching for a cup, you could not describe them. You would have to guess. The angles are correct anyway, because the computation is happening somewhere in your brain that you cannot reach. Your hand arrived at the object with the correct orientation for grasping. Something did the calculation. Something integrated the sensory streams, computed the motor solution, and executed the sequence with millimeter precision at speeds far beyond conscious reaction time. It was not the you that deliberates and chooses. It was a part of your brain that does this work continuously without ever appearing in your experience. Physical action you have ever performed carries an identical structure. Walking across a room, sitting down, bringing a cup to your lips, typing a word, tying a shoe. Each action is the visible surface of an enormous amount of unseen computation delivered to you as a single intention. You intend to drink. Your brain handles everything else, and the everything else is substantial. Patients with damage to the specific neural structures that handle this coordination lose the ability to execute practice motor skills, even though their conscious will remains intact. They can decide to walk. They cannot walk. The decision was never the walking. The walking was happening in a system that their conscious mind could access only through instruction, never through direct participation. When you walk across a room, you are watching a machine do something. The machine is inside your head. You can aim it. You cannot drive it. Here is a case that makes the separation starker than any healthy brain can demonstrate, because when the connection between visual processing and visual awareness is surgically cut, something unsettling survives. Patients with damage to the primary visual cortex lose conscious sight in the affected region of the visual field. They report blindness. They insist, when asked, that they see nothing on that side. Place an object in the blind region and ask them to describe it. They describe nothing. Ask them to guess its color, its shape, its orientation. They protest that guessing is meaningless because they cannot see it. Ask them to guess anyway. Their accuracy is far above chance. They correctly guess the color, the shape, the orientation, the location of an object they are certain they cannot see. Weisskranz named this phenomenon blindsight in the 1970s. The pathway that delivers visual information to the motor system and to unconscious discrimination is separate from the pathway that delivers visual information to awareness. Destroying the awareness pathway does not destroy the unconscious pathway. The patient retains the capacity to respond to visual information while genuinely believing they cannot see. Blindsight reveals something other than a rare disorder. It reveals the normal architecture made visible through damage. It is the normal architecture made visible through damage. In a healthy brain, both pathways are active, but awareness provides such a convincing account of its own completeness that the unconscious pathway is invisible. The blindsight patient cannot see consciously, so the unconscious contribution becomes measurable. In you, right now, both pathways are running. You experience the conscious one. You are influenced by both. Gap between seeing and knowing you see is a clinically documented phenomenon that proves the two are handled by different systems separable, not by philosophical argument but by surgical damage. Here is the measurement, because the examples so far have been qualitative and the actual numbers are what make the situation strange. Your sensory systems deliver approximately 11 million bits of information to your brain every second. The optic nerve carries roughly 10 million bits per second from your eyes. The auditory nerves carry around 100,000 bits per second from your ears. The somatosensory system, skin, muscles, joints, internal pressure sensors, carries another million bits per second from every surface and every muscle in your body. Taste, smell, vestibular input from your inner ear, interoception from your organs contribute additional tens of thousands of bits per second each. 11 million bits every second, flowing into your brain from the body and the environment. The number has been calculated from the measured bandwidth of the sensory nerves themselves, the physical channels through which information reaches the brain. The calculation has been verified by multiple independent estimates. Zimmerman published the foundational comprehensive analysis in 1989, and the figure has held up across decades of subsequent work. Against that, the other number. How much of those 11 million bits per second reaches the conscious awareness that you experience as yourself, thinking, perceiving, deciding? Approximately 50 bits per second. Under some conditions, 100. Occasionally, under optimal focus on a single demanding task, perhaps 200. Never more than that. The ceiling on conscious processing bandwidth has been measured across many experimental paradigms: reading speed, speech comprehension, visual discrimination tasks, decision speed, and the numbers converge within one narrow range across every method that has tested them. 11 million in, 50 out? Pause on that for a moment. The brain is receiving, in every second you are awake, roughly the information content of a small encyclopedia. The conscious mind you experience as yourself is receiving, in that identical second, roughly the information content of a short sentence. Reason the gap is so large is not that your brain is wasting the other 11 million bits. The gap exists because your brain is not one processor trying to handle everything. Your brain is hundreds of specialized systems, operating in parallel, each extremely good at a narrow range of tasks. Visual processing has separate streams for object identity and spatial action, one pathway that tells you what you are looking at, another pathway that tells your motor system where to aim your hands. Your auditory system has separate streams for what a sound is and where it came from. Your motor system has separate circuits for planning a movement, executing the movement, and correcting the movement in real time. Your memory has separate stores for facts, for skills, for autobiographical events, for emotional associations, for unconscious priming effects. Your emotional system has separate pathways for fast threat detection and for slower contextual evaluation. Your language system has separate networks for comprehension, for production, for grammar, for meaning. Each of these systems receives input, does its work, and produces output. Most of them do not need to report to consciousness in order to function. They communicate directly with other specialist systems through dedicated neural pathways. Your vision talks to your motor system, your memory talks to your emotional system, your language system talks to your attention system. The information flows between them without passing through awareness at all. Awareness is not where thinking happens. Awareness is a specific, limited channel used for particular purposes, coordinating across many systems, when a novel situation requires it, planning on long timescales, reasoning abstractly, storing autobiographical memory, maintaining a narrative self across time. These functions need the narrow channel. They need a broadcast mechanism that reaches all the specialist systems at once. But the bulk of your brain's work does not need broadcast. It needs parallel processing, and parallel processing is what it has. What you experience is the broadcast. What you do not experience is the parallel processing. The broadcast is what you call yourself. Return to the numbers with this architecture in mind. 11 million bits per second arriving in your brain. 50 bits per second reaching the awareness you call you. The ratio sits at 200,000 to 1 orders of magnitude beyond any intuition you might have carried from common figures like 95 to 5 or 99 to 1. In percentage terms, your consciousness contains approximately 0.0005% of the information your brain is receiving and processing at any given moment. The remainder 99.9995% is happening in the dark. It is being processed. It is influencing your behavior. It is shaping your perceptions, your emotions, your decisions. You are unaware of it. Ratio is not a limitation your brain is failing to overcome. The narrow channel of awareness is what consciousness is. Everything else is happening in the wider architecture that does not need to speak to you in order to work. Every face you recognize before your conscious mind knew who you were looking at. A specialized region in your brain identified the face, retrieved associations, generated an emotional valence, and delivered the result to consciousness as an already assembled recognition. You did not deliberate. You knew, because something else deliberated for you and handed you the answer as a completed package. Decisions have antecedents that begin in the unconscious. Libet demonstrated in the 1980s that a readiness potential in the motor cortex precedes conscious awareness of a decision by approximately 350 milliseconds. Your brain begins preparing the action before you report deciding to act. The interpretation has been contested. Later work by Scherger has argued that the readiness potential reflects ongoing neural fluctuation rather than a fully formed decision, but the basic observation that brain activity anticipates reported awareness has held up across many paradigms. Later experiments using functional MRI Soon and colleagues in 2008 showed that simple binary decisions could be predicted from brain activity up to 7 seconds before the subject reported making them. The decision was formed in unconscious processing and delivered to awareness as an already made choice that consciousness then narrated as its own. That 7-second gap, where a measurable brain signal determines a choice that the subject has not yet experienced making, is the interval that dislocated the word decision from the event I had spent my whole life assuming it described. The decision is not the moment you become aware of choosing. The decision has already happened by then, upstream, in systems that did the weighing without reporting to you. Awareness arrives late to the event, carrying a construction that feels like an origin but functions as a post hoc report. Same architecture shapes perception. Your brain combines sensory input with prior expectation to generate a best guess about what is in the world. Predictive processing. What you see is not what the eye delivered. What you see is what your brain inferred using the eye's signal as one input among several. The inference runs so fast and so consistently that it feels like direct perception. The feeling is a design feature. The inference is the mechanism. Every action you take draws on procedural knowledge, stored in systems you cannot inspect. How to walk, how to type, how to hold a pen, how to drive, how to speak your native language. The knowledge is stored in deep motor learning structures at the base of your brain, accessed automatically when needed, executed without conscious participation. You can describe that you speak your language. You cannot describe the grammar you are using to generate a sentence while you are generating it. The grammar is running. You are not running it. Gap is filled by 99.9995% of processing. The wider architecture is the actual engine of your mind perception, motor control, emotion, memory, language, social cognition, decision initiation, operating below the channel that you experience as yourself. Well, a reasonable question arrives here. If the brain can process 11 million bits per second, why does the self have access to only 50? Why evolve a consciousness so narrow when the hardware beneath it is so wide? Leading theory, among several competing accounts, developed by Bernard Bars in the late 1980s and elaborated by Stanislas Dehaene across the 2 decades that followed, is called global workspace theory. The proposal runs like this. The brain contains many parallel specialist systems, each excellent at a narrow task. These specialists cannot all communicate with each other simultaneously. The crosstalk would be computationally catastrophic. Every system would receive irrelevant information from every other system. The whole architecture would grind to a halt, overwhelmed by noise. So the brain evolved a limited capacity broadcast channel. Information that enters the channel becomes available to all specialist systems at once. Information that does not enter the channel remains local to its originating system. The broadcast is selective. Most processing stays local because most processing does not need to be shared. Consciousness is the broadcast. It is narrow because broadcast must be narrow to remain useful. A wider broadcast would flood every system with irrelevant input from every other system. The specialist would drown. The narrow channel keeps the system functional by permitting only the most important, most novel, most coordination requiring information to pass through it. That reframes what you think you are. You are not the mind. You are the broadcast channel within the mind. The specialist's vision, motor, memory, emotion, language are the mind. They do the work. You coordinate, narrate, plan on long time scales, reason abstractly, maintain continuity across time. These are real functions performed by a real mechanism, but they are not thinking in the sense the word usually implies. They are the layer on top of thinking, the narrow strip through which some of the thinking becomes accessible to the part of the system that will later remember it as me. Gap is what consciousness is. Remove the gap, let every parallel system broadcast at once, and consciousness would cease to function. The narrowness is the design. And here is where the question opens that the architecture forces. Because if the conscious self is a narrow broadcast channel processing less than 0.001% of the actual thinking, then the self's reports about its own motives, its own choices, its own reasons, these reports are generated by a system that did not do the thinking it is reporting on. Narrative your conscious mind constructs about yourself, your decisions, your preferences, your reasons, your sense of agency is a story built from a tiny sample of the processing that actually generated your behavior. The story functions as a useful summary rather than a lie well adapted to the purposes consciousness exists for, but it is a summary. The full computation is not available for inspection because if it were, the workspace would be swamped and you could not function. One more measurement before the implications, because the architecture has a feature that the 11 million to 50 ratio does not capture. Consciousness switches off every night. The parallel specialist systems do not. When you sleep, the broadcast channel goes dark. The narrative self disappears. The continuous story that awareness maintains across your waking hours stops being written for 6 to 8 hours. But the processing underneath continues, and in some respects, accelerates. Memory consolidation runs during sleep at a rate that waking consciousness would interfere with. Motor skills improve overnight without practice because the specialist systems replay and refine the day sequences while the broadcast is offline. Emotional processing continues. The amygdala remains active during certain sleep stages, integrating the day's affective content without the narrative system's interference. Problem solving continues. Creative combinations form. The sleep on it. Advice that every culture has some version of is a description of what the architecture does when the broadcast channel is unavailable to interfere. Waking in the morning brings insights you did not have the night before, the solution to a problem you could not solve, the right word for a sentence you could not finish, a new perspective on a conversation that made no sense at the time. The insights feel like they arrived from nowhere. They did not arrive from nowhere. They arrived from the 99.9995%, which kept working while you stopped being there to notice. The unconscious processing does not require your awareness to operate. Your awareness requires the unconscious processing to have something to broadcast about. The architecture runs in one direction only. This has implications worth sitting with. You cannot fully know why you did what you did. The conscious reason is a construction generated after the fact by the narrative system. It may be partially correct. It may be entirely invented. From inside awareness, you cannot distinguish which. The actual cause of the action involved unconscious processing that was never reported. Introspective reports are not fully trustworthy. When you describe your own motives, preferences, or feelings, you are describing the output of the narrative system, not the underlying mechanisms that produce the behavior. The narrative is generated for coherence, not for accuracy. A coherent wrong story reaches awareness more easily than a fragmented correct one, because coherence is what the broadcast channel rewards. Edits cannot be felt from inside the experience. The model of reality your brain presents you with feels complete because incompleteness is invisible from inside completeness. The parts that were filtered out never appear as gaps. They appear as nothing at all. The filtering is the experience. You have no vantage point outside it, and none of this diminishes you. The you that experiences the world is a real phenomenon. generated by a real mechanism, producing real effects. The experience is simply much smaller than it feels. It is the surface of a far deeper architecture that is also you, the part of yourself you cannot see, cannot inspect, cannot directly address, but that is doing the overwhelming majority of the work that makes your life possible. If you are caring for someone whose awareness has changed through dementia, stroke, or injury, the architecture described here is the reason their specialist systems can retain recognition, emotion, and motor knowledge long after the broadcast channel has narrowed. The person is still present in the parts the illness has not reached. When you recognize a face, when you reach for a cup, when you feel at ease with someone you have just met, when you know what you are going to say next, you are experiencing the output of a vast unconscious machine that has already completed the relevant work. You get the summary. You do not get the data, and the summary, which feels like all there is the smallest fraction of what you are. That ratio, 11 million to 50, the 99.9995% of yourself operating below your awareness, the architecture of a mind in which the conscious channel is the narrowest possible broadcast, layered on top of a massive parallel substrate, is the number that broke the assumption I had carried my entire life that the self I was experiencing was the whole of what I was. The self I had been calling me my whole life was not the mind. It was the smallest part of the mind, the part the rest of the mind sends its completed work to, so that the completed work can be remembered, narrated, and integrated into a continuous story across time. 11 million bits per second arrive in a brain that can consciously process 50. The ratio is 200,000 to 1. The fraction is so small that in ordinary language it rounds to nothing. You experience less than 1,000th of 1% of what your brain is doing at any given moment, and what you experience feels complete because you have no access to what you are missing. The rest is where perception is constructed, where decisions begin, where emotions are assembled, where motor plans are executed. The rest is where you happen. The part you call yourself is the narrow channel through which a small, edited fraction of you speaks to the rest. All of this has been operating your entire life. The committee of 50 bits has been presenting you with its summaries, and you have been calling them me. The machine they are summarizing is also you. You have just never been introduced.